I can learn, but I can't compare. We can always compare the other way. I did a great job compared to some other people, right?
True.
And we can never win. My point is we can never win in comparison.
And so I think that debunks the myth that work-life balance is easy for everyone else. It's not. It's just as difficult.
Yeah.
It's just as difficult. Hey, everybody, welcome back to View from the Top podcast, where we help family-first business owners and entrepreneurs get through the valleys and up the mountains to their very own view from the top. So glad you're all listening in today. We're going to dive in pretty quick here to the topic of work-life balance, and we're going to try our hand at debunking some myths around whether or not it's even possible to have it. If you find yourself struggling with time and energy you put into work and home, just keep listening in as Big A and I break down some myths through sharing our own successes and our own misses. Welcome, Big A.
Wally?
Hey.
Man, to be honest with you, I've not looked forward to this episode, just to be honest with you, because it brings up a lot of pain in my life. When I think about some of the disagreements that Robin and I've had over the course of our 4+ decades of marriage, this has been like right at the center of a lot of disagreements. And so this is opening up some wounds for me today, quite honestly. But I really think it's important that we discuss it. It's on the forefront of a lot of people's minds today, this work-life balance thing. So yeah, I just had to get that out of the way. I wanted to be totally transparent and honest right out of the gate. It's like, we got to talk about some things that are not fun sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. We'll try not to bloody ourselves up too bad. I know they're bringing up some wounds. Hopefully we won't rip off too many Band-Aids, but maybe a few here and there. We'll see. As we go.
I don't know. We'll see where it goes. I'm not sure, but we need to do it.
I know. I think a good place to start is how do you define work-life balance?
I wish there were a concrete definition for that, because it would have saved a lot of disagreements between Robin and I if we could have defined, because my definition of work-life balance and Robin's definition were entirely different.
Yeah.
And I think that's some of what we need to define today. Ultimately, it's where the two of us will come to an agreement on what's appropriate as far as the work hours are concerned, and what's appropriate for, my personal life. And it's kind of ebbed and flowed throughout the course of our marriage. I think the definition for that is different at different seasons in our life.
Yeah, we're going to dive into some of that. I know my experience in business and family and being married, man, coming up almost, I know you got a few more years on me, but almost 30 years here in May. Man, I worked from home a lot of years. We'll talk a little bit about that as a myth as well. Is it possible to even find that? And so there's some interesting challenges I think we've both had. And I've struggled to define it. I really have. And I even wonder sometimes, is it possible? But why do you think that we strive for work-life balance? Like, why do most guys seem to strive for that?
Yeah, I think it brings a lot of peace in the home, when we have that, because Wally, I know you're a lot like me. You love what you do, right? Yeah. Sometimes you don't even consider it work. And sometimes Robin will go, you need to not work. It doesn't even feel like work. Like I love talking and encouraging the guys and leading the mastermind groups. I love to coach, and just got back off of a one-on-one coaching client. And I told you when we started the recording or before, is like, I could have sat there 6 more hours, right? Because it's so interesting, and we're unfolding real life situations. We're peeling the layers back, and it's just so interesting to be able to do that. And it doesn't even, not always. Now there's sometimes I'm like, dude, I'm ready to go home at noon. But a lot of the times I love what I'm doing, and I'm grateful. And you love what you're doing as well. We're very fortunate that we'll be able to do that. But there's some responsibilities that we have as a dad and as a husband. We've made this promise that we're going to do the right things. We've entered into a covenant relationship. And sometimes, my being zealous to do certain things overrides the priorities that I have in my life. And if I'm going to say that my priority is my family, then Robin and I need to sit down and really decide what is acceptable. And, right out of the gate, I want to say this at the beginning of this podcast, that what you and I see as the right thing may not be the right thing for everybody, right? It works for Robin and I, and it works for you and Sonia. You know, it's going to be different as we go through here, but maybe we can give some practical tips to where they can communicate better with your spouse. And even if you're not married, it's like, you know, we still need to have some semblance of order and balance and kind of a rhythm, if you will. I think you used that word earlier today when you and I were talking about this, and I love that word. Hopefully we'll break that down a little bit further. But just right out of the gate, we're not saying that this is etched in stone. This is not the 10 commandments on how to get work-life balance, but we want you to be cognizant of the decisions that you're making. We want you to be sure that you've prioritized the right things. And so, as we break it down, that'll be fun.
Yeah, I think we're going to get some pretty good nuggets and some pretty good nuggets out of here. So let's start with myth number 1 that I have down here. Work-life balance is easy for everyone else but us. Oh,
that is such a myth. You know, the thing is we all think that. We think, well, everybody else has got it figured out, and we're the only ones that don't have it figured out. And that's just not true. I just have coached too many people, hundreds of people over the years, and then being in business for myself. And yeah, that's a myth. No question about it. We all struggle at times with this work-life balance.
Yeah. I think when I think of times when I've thought, oh man, that guy's got it figured out, right? He just looks like he's got it figured out. And then you go have a conversation with them and you realize that, oh man, like they're just as messed up, and they're thinking, and some of the challenges that you're facing, they're having as well. Yet we kind of fall into this comparison game a little bit, right? When we start thinking about other people. And I think the comparison game can be a really dangerous, slippery slope.
Yeah. We don't need to compare at all, but let's back up for a second. And you said something that I don't want people to miss, is that once you start talking to people one-on-one, you find out that there's maybe some skeletons in their closet as well. See, as a rule, people have a facade. They have this persona that they want you to believe they've got it all figured out. And they're sitting at home privately at night discussing with their spouse, you know, I don't really know what to do about this situation because we want to make money and we want to get ahead. We want to save, you know, we want to pay off debt. At the same time, you want me to be home for little Susie's cheerleading practice and Bobby's baseball game. And you want me to sit on the couch with you at 5 o'clock and watch a movie. And like, golly, how do I balance that? Like, how do I make all that happen? Because when July gets here, you're going to want to go on that cruise. And when Tuesday night gets here and Bobby's playing baseball, you're going to want me there. And I just don't know how to do those things. And so the one-on-one authenticity, the transparency, the vulnerability that guys are willing to share once you get one-on-one, you discover that they're having similar problems, maybe not exactly like yours. And so that's what I want this podcast to reveal, is that at different stages in life, at different places in life, we're all dealing with these situations to one degree or another. But how do we keep it in check? How do we preserve our relationships? How are we the dad that we were called to be? How are we the husband? Or if you're a lady listening, how are you the wife that God called you to be in order to have the things that you want to accomplish? And a little later, I've got some ideas on some practical applications to this that maybe we can share. But the truth of the matter is we all deal with this problem.
Yeah. I think a lot of it, at least for guys anyway, I'm not a woman, so I can't speak from that perspective. But I can tell you that from a guy's perspective, at least from mine, that that whole comparison game of thinking that someone else has it figured out is really because I just feel inadequate at the end of the day, right? I don't want to feel inadequate, but I do. And when I start feeling that way, it's easy to start comparison, and that just takes you down like this crazy path of it starts with, something simple as, oh man, they look like, he's able to go to the game, or he's able to do this, or he's able to do that.
Right.
I remember Sonia and I had this conversation just a few weeks ago. In her podcast, she was talking about being an entrepreneur's wife. And one of the things that she mentioned was that what people saw on the outside from us, right? We had a lot of W-2 friends, if you will. We had some friends that were business owners as well, but most were W-2 earners. And there's not, I don't say that as a comparison of something wrong or right with either one. They are a little different for the most part. And so one of the things that she would hear from comments from other women sometimes was they would draw that comparison and make it, well, you know, Kevin's business must be doing great because he's able to be here for this and be there for that. And, you know, my husband can't do that. He's, you know, he's at the office and he's doing this thing and whatever. And so they draw this comparison that like, oh, we've got this great thing. And Sonia made a point. She said, but what they didn't see was that, yeah, you took off at 2:00 to go do this thing with our family. But then we got home at 6:00 and you were in the office from 6:30 until 10:30 at night. Like the things you just don't see. And so I think it's important that we don't draw comparisons.
Well, let's go the other way for a second, though. Let me ask you a question. Do you compare the other way, though? Do you say, you know, I'm really doing well in these areas? See, we tend not to do that. We tend to compare against the things that we're not accomplished in. It's like, I'm not doing as well in this area, but this person is. Arrogance and pride can creep in the other way. So we've got to be just as conscious of the comparison the other way. And so it's a delicate balance. Both ways, we've got to be very conscious and careful that we're not making a sense of comparison, because you're not that guy. Either way, God's given you skills. He's given you talents. He's given you, I think about your daughters. You've done a spectacular job with your 3 girls. Got 3 beautiful daughters. They've all done well. You should be proud. And sometimes the things, and I'm a little ahead of you as far as age, you know, my daughters are a little bit older, but I look back and go, man, I wished I had some of the skills that you had with your girls, because I honestly messed up in some areas with my girls. I was like, man, I should have done that. Kevin would have done, and I got to catch myself. And I'm like, I'm not Kevin.
That's
like,
right.
I don't do, you know, that's not who I am. I can learn, but I can't compare. We can always compare the other way. I did a great job compared to some other people, right?
True.
But I didn't do, and we can never win. My point is, we can never win in comparison.
Yeah. And so I think that debunks the myth that work-life balance is easy for everyone else. It's not. It's just as difficult.
Yeah.
It's just as difficult. All right. Myth number 2, I'm just getting my business going. There's no such thing as balance.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's the thing. And I've really struggled with this over the years, is because I use that excuse, you know, a dozen plus times.
Me
with
too.
Rob.
Yeah.
I just started. It's going to be okay. It's not going to be that way forever. And Robin's like, I've heard this same hymn over and over and over. You know, how many times are you going to sing that song? And I'm like, well, it'll be okay. And here's the reality of it. Here's the truth of it, is that it takes extra work sometimes to get ahead. Yeah, that's the truth. I mean, it's just, you just can't go in and work from 8 to 5, you know, be off every weekend, not work at night. I mean, the truth of the matter is that if you're going to get ahead and you're going to do some things that other people are not willing to do, right, there's benefits to that. I mean, you do gain a measure of success as a result of working a little bit more. I think the real key to this, though, is open communication and dialogue. And I'll just lay it out there. I'm transparent on all these calls. I didn't do a good job with that the first 20 years of my marriage. I was like, hey, I got this. I'm in charge of this. I got control of it. And that created another argument. That'll be a podcast for a different day. But I was like, if I had it to go over, I would sit down and say, what are we trying to accomplish? I love what you always say. What are we trying to solve for, right? What is that? And then what are we willing to do in order to get there? What are we willing to sacrifice? Is it a few hours, a couple of nights a week? Is it we won't get there as fast? I didn't do a good job communicating. Kevin, how did you do with Sonia in communicating this particular myth?
Oh, man. I think for me, it was, well, let me start by sharing a story that just, man, I've heard it so many times. I feel like over the last 10 years of my life, and it kind of irks me a little bit. And that is that I see what I feel are successful folks from, you just look at them and say, oh yeah, they're pretty successful. They're authors, or they've, been in business a long time, and they tend to be a little older. And so there's a natural like respect for wisdom there, right? For sure. And I'll be in a mixed crowd of guys that are, 60, 50, 40, 30 business owners. And you're in this crowd and there's someone speaking from the stage. And they're telling you basically, if I could go back, I would slow down. If I could go back, I would do this different. If I could go back, I would make sure I took time for this. And I'm not saying there's not truth in that. But what everyone's hearing in the audience is you don't have to work as hard. And here's a person that worked hard. And obviously they've gotten to a point that you think they're successful, and they're telling you not to work. And I'm like, it just makes, because you got those young people sitting there in that audience thinking, what in the world? They get confused. It's like, what do you mean?
Yeah. Because those guys are not telling them straight up. You've got to put in extra, right? You got to work hard.
I think it's easy to forget. Yeah. I don't know what it's like for you, but I do. I mean, when I first started in business, before I even had a business, that's one of the reasons I went into business, is because I was putting in 80 hours a week for somebody else.
Right.
And then the company would go under, I was in. When I'm in. Right. And I just got tired of that after 2 times. I was like, man, it's just, if I'm going to put this much time in, I'm going to put the time in for myself and for my own family.
So what do these guys do with that information? So let's talk about that for a second. Yeah. So we're not telling them not to work hard, right? Yeah, right. And so the wisdom, I think, comes in, for me, would be better communication. Like I didn't do a good job with Rob in sitting down going, well, here, let me be fair to myself though. Like I opened my first business when I was 18. I didn't have any idea what I was getting into. It was like, I had to figure it out. So the second or third business, they got to go. It doesn't matter. It's like now we're in. We've jumped out of the skillet into the fire, and so now we got to go. But the second and third business, I could have done a much better job with sitting down, saying, "Listen, we're not working for somebody else, right? We've got to do it ourselves, and that's going to require some more time." Like, where are you at with this? Like, how are you with this? Is it keeping you from accomplishing some of your dreams and goals? Is it impacting Brooke or Holly, right? It's like, what is the deal here? Like here, I'm going to bring up a couple of things I hadn't even planned on talking about, but I'll say it. My mom's 88, and we have the privilege of seeing her regularly. She lives here on our property, and just what a delight, what a blessing it is. And my mom made a comment recently. She's just real blunt. Y'all think I'm blunt. My mom is like real blunt. She'll just say it straight up. Man, and she said, we worship the children today. I'm like, what do you mean by that? What does that even mean? She goes, it ain't going to kill them if you miss one of their baseball practices, right? You don't want to miss the important events. But it's okay. If you got to work a little bit more, it's showing responsibility. And so we're like forsaking all to be at every single thing, every single event, every time they do anything, you've got to be right there. And we're hurting our kids. We're not teaching them any sense of independence whatsoever. Also, she said something pretty valuable. She said, we're not teaching them about disappointment. They're going to deal with disappointment as they get older, and they need to learn not terrible things from us as parents, but there's a sense of disappointment that is natural. And so we've got to say, hey, Daddy's not going to be at every single ball game. Try to be them if you can, right? Don't use this podcast as an excuse to miss your little boy's baseball practice. That's not what I'm saying. But there are seasons that we're going to have to go through. But I would implore you to get with your spouse and say, what does it look like? Let's coordinate our schedules. Let me get buy-in from you that you're okay with this and talk through it. That's what I didn't do. I dealt with the arguments and the disappointments and the fights, and I was like, this is what I got to do. And so I would say the communication piece is huge.
Yeah, you mentioned the word rhythm earlier on, and it wasn't until probably, I didn't start off in business. I started off in business just like you did. I didn't know anything. I feel like I didn't finish college. Like that was a bad thing, but not that college was going to teach me how to run a business necessarily either. Right. But, getting started, not knowing anything. I mean, it took me a number of years until probably 98, 99 was the first business. And then it was probably 2012 where I got the idea. I didn't come up with it on my own, but just someone I was listening to, and it clicked about the difference between balance and what I call rhythm. And I've heard other people talk about this too. And I think it's so rich that, I say rhythm because it lines up directly with what you're talking about. It's communication. And so you're just starting a business, that myth of like, that, oh man, you can take it easy and, make your kids the most important thing and your wife the most. That's true. Like they are the most important thing.
They are.
There are rhythms though in everything that we do. Are we hardly ever like directly in the center of the road? We're kind of usually pulled one side or the other. Right. So that idea of rhythm, I like of, okay, I don't have to be necessarily in balance all the time, but I need to find a rhythm and I need to be able to communicate that rhythm effectively, both to my spouse, my children, and I think too, the people you work with, because especially as a leader in your business, obviously a leader in your home, you're setting a precedent and an example, but as a leader in your business, like I've always felt the extra call, right? As a mission that the people that are working alongside of me, I don't want them working 80-hour weeks.
Right.
Like that's,
you'll kill them, right? And they'll go away and then you'll start over.
That's not why we're in business.
Right.
But there may be a 2-week period
where you got to
where for us, it was, we had a website release, a version release, and we had to do a lot of testing and we had to launch. Sure. And so there were periods where it was, there were the 2 a.m.s and the next mornings were kind of messed up. But if I didn't communicate that, oftentimes I didn't communicate that with Sonia clearly. Right. And that created a lot of conflict.
Here's the thing too. It can create a lot of distrust and lack of respect from your spouse, is because you can only tell them that so many times. And when you don't adhere to your promises eventually, then your words are futile. They're not going to mean anything. They're going to be hollow. And I started to see that because early on, 25 years ago, Robin would go, I've heard this before. And it hurt, and that would create another argument. What do you mean by that? And she was like, you told me that, but here we are again. We find ourselves in this place. And so as an older guy now with some years of experience behind me, professionally and personally, I will say that I would be more cautious at what I said and how I said it. I would be more strategic in nature, sitting down, communicating more openly, getting feedback and hearing out Robin, right? And not just saying, hey, it's this way or the highway. I was guilty of that early on. And so I wouldn't say that you don't have to work hard, right? Because you do have to work hard. And so I want to be above average. My mom used to say average is just as close to the bottom as it is the top. I didn't want to be average. I wanted to be above average, and I had to put in more work in order to be above average. And I think, even sitting here listening to ourselves, Wally, I think the truth is it's better communication. I think that's what you're talking about, being off to the right or the left. I was always off to the right because I was usually pulling myself out of the ditch. And so I found myself on the right side of the lane. And that's the reason I was on the right side. But the truth is we don't have to go there. And I think it's just really prioritizing our priorities, really getting in focus with like-minded vision and then great communication. Yeah. And I think we can find that rhythm.
Yeah, that's it. It's funny. Like I use the word rhythm and you use the word keeping ourselves out of the ditch. Yeah. I love our personalities and how they're so different. It's really funny. Sounds like we ought to have Nanny's 101 words of wisdom document sometime.
We do, don't we? We do. Yes.
Yeah, she's one smart cookie, man. That's awesome.
I'm going to bring her on the podcast one day. That'll be fun.
That would be fun. All right. Myth number 3, having a plan isn't important. I just roll with things as they happen.
Yeah, that's a myth too. I'm guilty of that as well. Early on, it was like, hey, ready, fire, aim, let's go. And that was like, fire the gun and ride the bullet. I'm ready to go. And that served me well a couple of times, but other times you can't just roll with it. You do need to have a plan. And I'll just say publicly, Wally, you've done a really great job here at View from the Top and helping coordinate that vision, playing that integrator role, really helping us build that succinct vision. So thank you. I want to publicly thank you. You've done a great job. So yes, that's a myth. You can't just ready, fire, aim. Yeah, we need to have a plan.
Yeah. So I think
in order
both
to be
at
successful.
work, I think both at work and at home, and maybe even at home,
Right.
It's just as important as work. And one of the areas of having a plan that I failed at as a leader in my home, and is around the idea of roles. And I just thought it would work out. Like, you grow up in a home and you think, oh, it's going to be like my parents, and you have no idea how they came to, where they came to, even talk of them, you just don't really know until you get married and start your own lives together. It literally wasn't until this is really being really transparent, because I feel I'm tempted to feel like a really weak person when I say this. And that is that it was literally 3 months ago that my wife and I had our first real conversation about roles in our home. And we don't have any kids in the house anymore. They're all gone. And they're all out, married and on their own, living their own lives. And it started around some conversations we were having, and it was my daughter, my oldest daughter. She had made a statement earlier on a couple of years ago that I went back to her and asked her about, and my son-in-law, Ashley and Simeon. And I asked them, I said, what's one thing, we were talking as a family, and we were talking about, what's one thing that you saw in us as parents? Because we all have this thing. There's something you saw in us as parents that you were going to change when you got married. And both Ashley and Simeon said it was the same for them and his parents as well, that they didn't have well-defined roles in their home, and it created a lot of chaos. And I was like, well, to walk us through that more, like, help us understand. And so to make it really simple, what they said was, Simeon said, we basically determined verbally, we agreed that, everything outside the house, cars, yard, taking out garbage, stuff like that, that typical things we may think of as roles. We were very intentional about saying, okay, as Simeon said, I'm accountable. That's important. I'm accountable for that happening. So Simeon's accountable to make sure things like the cars get taken care of. Ashley was accountable for most everything else inside the walls of the home, including the kitchen and bathrooms and things like that. And this is a real simplistic level, and it expands as you get older. But the idea was, this is the point that I missed, that they said, that I was like, dang, that's so good, was that it's not that Simeon doesn't help with dishes.
Right. Yeah.
It's that when he does do them, it's clear he's helping. There's no confusion about who is supposed to do them. That's a really simple example, but I think you take that and, like, the roles in our homes, we're not intentional talking about the responsibilities around the house and who's ultimately accountable. I was like, so Sonny and I had just recently, in the last few months, have been kind of teasing and picking at some of these things in our home related to where be intentional about our roles. And already, just the simplest little things just brings more peace.
Yeah. You know what that also does, Wally? It makes you want to even help them more.
Right on. Yeah.
And I know that Robin and I have similar boundaries and things. We kind of sat down early on. Robin was very clear on the things that she wanted to be responsible for. That's good. I don't know if it's good or not. I keep boiling eggs. You know what I'm saying? It worked out really well. I think I've cooked 3 meals in 43 years, but Robin's like, I got this. I love to cook. But it makes me want to help her with other things, is because I know that she's very intentional about the things that she does. And like, I'll dust and vacuum or clean up or pick up or help put the dishes, whatever it is. Like, I want to serve her well, but I love that. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think most couples have the conversation that you and Sonia did.
I agree.
Until it's way, way down the road. And I would encourage you, if you're listening to this today, now don't go in there and say, hey, you're in charge. Don't do that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is sit down and say, let's have a family meeting, right? What is it? What are the expectations? Brett Barnhart always says that unmet expectations create our frustrations. And a lot of the times we're thinking through things. We're like, man, she should be doing this or he should be doing this.
Right.
Get it out on the table and go, hey, let's just talk through this. And clarity, right? I had another buddy that used to say a hard 10-minute discussion brings a lot of clarity on the other side. And that is so true. So if you've not had those, choose a date night, go out really, right? Don't do it during the heat of the battle, but just say, hey, you know what? I heard this podcast today and these guys were bringing up some things that maybe you and I need to discuss that we never have, and get some clarity around that so you don't create those unmet expectations.
Yeah, that's a good word, man. Squash that myth. Get an actual plan in place. All right, next one. Working remotely from home makes work-life balance impossible.
Yeah.
I'll take that one.
Take it, Wally. Take it.
I'll take that one
at home
first.
for 30 years or something.
I've been working from home before it was popular, for sure. When I started the last business that I had back in 2003, I had to make a decision if we were going to get an office or not. And I was following a company called 37 Signals back then. They're now called Basecamp. It's like a task management system. But the founders of that company were kind of on the forefront of working remotely. And so they wrote some books even on it. And so I was a student of that. And that's how I designed the company. And so from 2003 until 2019, we never had a physical office ever. Had 40 team members working in 7 different states, never had a physical office. And I remember in 2008, especially in 2010, trying to hire people. You try to hire them and working from home. I mean, that was like a scam or a multi-level marketing thing.
Right.
It wasn't a real, like, you're actually going to pay me real money to do work, working from home. Right. And I remember that shift when I went to work from home. It took me 3 months. And I really feel for people that went through the COVID experience, that were just thrust into being from home and they weren't ready or prepared for it. There's a difference of working from home and you're the only one there while the kids are at school. But when everybody was thrown into that working from home environment where everyone's home all the time, that was a super elevated challenge. And I think through that, it's like, well, I'm home. Almost maybe COVID gave us the opposite problem. We weren't working enough. We had more home balance than we did. Right. We were out of rhythm a little bit. But isn't that okay? We just talked about rhythm. Sure. Isn't it okay that for that period of time, the rhythm was, how many families got closer? We heard that over and over again from guys. Yeah, it was fantastic. So I think I disagree with it. It's that it's not possible just because you work from home. But again, going back to communication, but also boundaries. Sonia and I had to set very clear boundaries up front, and she violated them often. Yeah. She will tell you that. And, it was like, hey, when I'm in the office, I'm working. Right. Like, this is a thing, right? This is
unless you're bringing me a cookie and a cup of coffee, like that, the door is shut.
That's good. But we had to have those boundaries. Right. And, I was also aware too, this is one of those, this is a balance thing, I think, is that sometimes we can get so focused on the rule or the boundary we put in place that we don't allow for any flexibility. Let me give you an example. Yeah. When the girls came home from school at 2:30, 3 o'clock, my door was off, the office door was off of the garage. Where was the first place they went, especially when they were younger? First place they went was busting into dad's. So when I heard that garage door go up, like whatever I was doing, like I put it on pause and I made sure I was available.
That's
for
a real
them
blessing. Think
for
about
5
minutes.
minutes. That's all they needed was 5 minutes.
Yeah. What a blessing.
And I thought it was the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah.
That's good. You're right. There are a lot of blessings. There's challenges, but there's can be a lot of blessings working from home.
Pat Flynn with Smart Passive Income gave me a pretty good tip. We were talking one day, and his office is off of his home. And I was in bricks and mortar for 35 years. Yeah. I've been in this space about 10 years. And I've built recently, 2 years ago, a building off the side of my house. It's got my office and garage and all that stuff in it. And there's a good separation. Robin comes and goes. I never know when she's leaving or coming. She doesn't me because I pull in and out of this garage and she never knows when I'm coming or going. And then she'll see me at lunch, right? I get to go over and eat lunch. But Pat Flynn gave me a good tip that he does, and I've not been great at it. I've been average at it, so I'll just confess. But he said that he leaves his work phone, he leaves his laptop, he shuts the light off, he pulls the door to, and that's as though he was in a bricks and mortar, and now he puts his daddy hat on and his husband hat on. And I don't think he's been perfect at it, but it's a really good goal to try to do that, to give some separation from when you work at home. But yeah, I've learned a lot from Pat in regards to how to work from home better. And so a lot of folks really out there today.
That's great. I think
those boundaries.
I think too, one of the challenges that when you have some type of a ride home in the car, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, there's a little bit of like downtime and kind of reset time. I never did this because just the commute was 30 seconds or whatever.
Right.
And I didn't need to because of my personality, but I had some buddies some friends that worked from home. And one of them in particular, he would literally just go walk around the house 3 times. Like he'd just go outside and walk around the house 3 times. They gave him just enough. He'd walk in and it was enough to make that transition.
That's good.
So I think it can be done. But again, I think back to just being intentional.
Yeah. Hey, sure. I want to give a little tip to folks that do try to accomplish work-life balance. It's something that Robin did masterfully. I'm going to give her kudos for this. When I was in bricks and mortar, I would come home and the girls were there. They want to play. Daddy's home, and we hug and kiss and all that kind of stuff, And I'm like, okay. And Robin would always say, hey, give your dad 30 minutes. Let him sit there. Let him unplug if he wants to read the paper, wants to watch the news, whatever. Just give him a minute. Let him decompress. And then you girls go, y'all shoot pool or play or swim or whatever you want to do. And that was I can't even begin to tell you what a blessing that was. And so if you're a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad and your wife comes home, listen, if you really want to treat them well and you've got small children, give them a minute, right? I know you've been at home with the kids all day. Give him a minute or give her a minute and let them decompress. It just shows that you respect them and that you want them to be able to unplug. So just a little tip for those that have a spouse that works outside the house.
Yeah, I like that. All right. Last myth that we're going to debunk today. I'm sure there's lots more, but these are the ones that we got feedback on that we figured we want to share with you guys. So last myth is there is a time balance utopia just out of reach.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I hadn't found it. I hadn't found the time balance utopia. It goes back to what we talked about earlier, Wally, is there seasons. And there's different stages of life. And I don't know of many things that are utopia in life today anyway. There's just difficult seasons. There's challenges. Life deals us curveballs occasionally. I think it all still goes back to being open, being agile, being able to modify maybe your plans, being able to have open dialogue and communication. Here's the other thing is being honest. I was a little bit scared to do that early on in my marriage. Robin was a little bit nervous about just being blatantly honest. And I think over time, you earn that with your spouse, but it's just being able to say, you know what, there's a hiccup. We got a bump in the road. I'm feeling this way. And Robin, I talk about it when I'm a guest on podcast. I say I came home with a pocket full of money to a house full of strangers. And that was true. Had some success early on, but Robin came up to me one day when I walked in the door and she said, I feel like a single mom. And I thought we were doing okay, but we hadn't been openly communicating. So as far as utopia goes, we've not even after 4 decades found utopia, but it's just that constant evolution of communicating, understanding what's before us and talking through it.
Yeah. I often have fallen into the trap of thinking that there's some type of utopia that we're going to reach. Like, it's just there, man. If it's just this, if I could just get this figured out, And we have he's a friend of yours. I think we've actually both been to him for counseling, Floyd Dawson.
Yeah.
And he was at an event recently where we were both there, and he was talking about this idea. I'm not going to go into the whole thing and be for a different time, but he was talking that idea about that tend to get this idea in our head that there's some perfectionism. There's something that if we just work a little harder, if it just worked out this way, that we'd reach this thing. And he talks about this idea of that in that state of mind, we're human doings. And the reality is God created us to be human beings.
Yeah.
And I think that idea of being a human being, living in God's design, I think is ultimately what we've been saying, the thread through this whole thing, which is the idea of rhythm, the idea of communication. When we think about the idea of home and work, and whether you want to call it balance, you want to call it rhythm, you want to call it whatever you want to call it. But that idea of communication is so key. And communication allows us to be human beings, if you will.
You know, as we close the show today, I want to suggest that there's a resource out there that you can get. Rory Vaden wrote a great book called Procrastinate on Purpose. And the theme of the book is prioritizing our priorities. And I think it all comes down to that. Roy even says in the book, it's very difficult to quantify what work-life balance is. He said, the truth of the matter, we should be really out of balance in the 5 key areas of life that matters. Spend an inordinate amount of time focusing on the things that really move the needle. So sit down and prioritize your priorities, really dedicate and allocate the time that it requires in order to be amazing in those 4 or 5 areas. And I think you're going to have a hugely successful and significant life.
You know, Big A, one of the questions that I've heard you ask before is, what does life look like in 3 years if you do nothing different? And so I think all of us, I mean, I've even learned a few things, been reminded of a few things, I guess, myself during this conversation with you, is that we can listen to what we just listened to. But if we don't actually take any action, right? If we don't go get the book Procrastinate on Purpose, if we don't go download the free download we have called What Do I Want worksheet, it just walks you through one question at a time in each area of your life. So you can set a firm foundation. So you have something to build from. So you can find the rhythm, right? You can go to viewfromthetop.com/resources. That's viewfromthetop.com/resources and get that free What Do I Want document. That'll be helpful. And the other book that Big A mentioned, Procrastinate on Purpose, is a great resource as well. You can find that easily on Amazon. So I love the slogan. You can go fast alone, or you can go further together. And I just would encourage each of you to get a group of people around you that you can lean into, and that you can also, they're going to lean into you and challenge you and encourage you on your journey in this climb to get our own view from the top. So thank you all for listening today. Go grab that download, viewfromthetop.com/what do I want. And Big A and I'll see you on the next episode.